become very popular with some of the protesters. Watch.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
Hands up. Don't shoot. This has become the new symbol. A new statement. A statement wherein people around the country now are calling to the attention of those who don't quite understand that this is a movement that will not dissipate.
Texas Democrat Al Greene is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he is the man you just saw speaking there. Thank you for being here tonight, sir. Let me start with this. On the night that the Ferguson grand jury released its findings, the Congressional Black Caucus chair released a statement that read in part as follows. This decision seems to underscore an unwritten rule that black lives hold no value, that you may kill black men in this country without consequences or repercussions. Do you agree with that?
Thank you for having me on the program. I respect law enforcement, and I also want to let you know that I respect people who peacefully protest, and in your earlier segment you showed some of the things that happened that were quite dastardly done. I do not respect those who engage in dastardly deeds, and I think people who commit crimes ought to be prosecuted. With that said, I think that we have to recognize that there has been, for many years, probably before you and I were born, Ms. Kelly, black people who have been prosecuted and persecuted in this country. And no one says today that all of that prosecution and persecution is no longer occurring.
Correct, but that doesn't answer the question, because there have been statements made about this particular case that seem to many to be beyond the pale, including that the decision by the grand jury not to indict this police officer under these circumstances underscores an unwritten rule that black lives have no value and that you may kill black men in this country without consequence. I mean, do you stand by that?
Well, I think that it does happen with impunity in some cases.
Well, what about in this case?
I think, well, let's talk about this case. I'm pleased that you decided to do so. I think that in this case, we have a basic premise that has not been applied, and that is, it is not enough for things to be right, they must also look right. And in this case, it doesn't look right for a prosecutor to take this case to a grand jury when he could have taken it to a judge. He could have had a preliminary hearing. And at that preliminary hearing, we would have had total transparency, and the world would have been able to see what occurred. I think that would have been the better course of conduct to pursue, because it's not enough for things to be right, they must also look right. And the perception can exist when you take things behind closed doors that you're engaging in a process that is not fair.
Well, grand jury proceedings are secret. I mean, that's just the way it goes, and they're used in many cases. But let me ask you this, because one of the things that we learned from the prosecutor...
Because that comment requires a response.
Well, listen, I mean, the grand jury proceeding was an extra. In many cases, the prosecutor would have said, I'm not charging, and that's the end of it.
You don't have to go there. This prosecutor didn't have to go there. He
could have said, I'm not charging, and that's the end of the matter.
Well, he could have, and that would have been wrong, too.
Okay, let me ask you this, because one of the problems in this case is that the actual evidence that was presented to said grand jury is being largely ignored by these protesters who we're seeing with the hands up, don't shoot. Okay, because the evidence in front of that grand jury was not that Michael Brown came up with his hands up saying, don't shoot. That was not the evidence. And I wanted to show you what the evidence was. These are African-American witnesses. African-American witnesses who testified before the grand jury, who testified, I'll just give you a couple samples. One, Mike Brown continuously came forward in the charging motion, and at one point he started to slow down, he came to a stop, and when he stopped, that's when the officer ceased fire, and Mike Brown started to charge once more at him, and the officer returned fire. Witness number two, another African-American witness. Then Michael turned around and started charging towards the officer, and the officer still yelling, stop. He did have his firearm drawn, but he was yelling, stop, stop, stop. He didn't, so he started shooting him. And here's a third. I thought he was trying to charge at him first, because the only thing I kept saying was, is he crazy? Why don't he just stop instead of running? Because if somebody's pulling a gun on you, first thing I would think is to drop down on the ground. That was the evidence that the grand jury heard.
That was not all of the evidence that the grand jury heard.
That's enough, sir, to say there is no probable cause to charge somebody.
Not enough. Not if you have other evidence from several witnesses who had statements that were antithetical to those statements.
You get to make it's a 51% standard, and it didn't go your way. Why can't you accept that?
Indicated that his hands were up. You had other witnesses who indicated that he was not charging. You had other witnesses
every witness who testified he was charging was African American. How is this a race thing?
You're only going to present a side that seems to favor the prosecution.
Every witness who testified he was charging the cop was African American.
There were other witnesses, and you're avoiding what those other witnesses said.
And you're avoiding these witnesses.
By doing that, what you're doing is creating the appearance of only 3 witnesses.
I'm not, sir.
Yes,
because,
you are.
No, I'm
and
not. Because it doesn't have to be open and shut. The grand jury has to find by 51% that they think that a charge should be brought. I'm giving you the evidence that would justify the decision, saying it's just not there. And the thing about let me just ask you a question. I'll give you the floor. I'm going to give you the floor. I'm going to give you the floor.
Conflicting evidence indicates that you can have something sent to a jury and you can have a question of fact.
Just because there's conflicting evidence doesn't mean it has to go to a jury.
But it was not done in this case. He did not take it to a preliminary hearing. He could have taken it before a judge. That would have been total transparency. And
I got that. You made that point.
To hear those other witnesses that you are not bringing up.
But you know
what? You're
telling
one side of the story, and you're doing your viewers a disservice.
No, I'm not. Listen, they've heard that repeatedly. Here on this. All right, sir. Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn.
That's not what you should do. You should be fair and balanced.
Listen. Now it's my turn. How is it about race when every witness who testified Michael Brown was charging that cop was African American?
Well, because African Americans can make mistakes too.
All of them? All 6 of them?
Well, what about all of the others who said that he wasn't?
But were they racially motivated? They were trying to set
why
up...
are African Americans only racially motivated, Megan?
Okay, so they're racist too.
No,
Sir,
I'm not saying anybody's racist. You said that. You're bringing race into this.
You're part of the Congressional Black Caucus. They're the ones who released the statement that black lives have no value and you can kill black men with impunity.
To become the truth. You're not doing that properly. You have to let both sides be heard. And if both sides are heard and you have conflicting evidence, a good prosecutor gets an indictment and then he takes that to a trial.
On this show and this channel, unlike any other, you get both sides.
On this channel, you should be fair and balanced.
We are. And here you get both sides, unlike the other places where you only hear from the Ferguson protesters. I gotta go. Thanks for being here. Up next, attorneys for Darren.